My name is Jaime Del Rio, and I am field organizer for Abundant Housing LA. Thank you, everyone, for joining in on this evening. Before we get started, I would like to do land acknowledgement. Abundant Housing LA recognizes and acknowledges the first people of this ancestral and unceded territory of Tetamian and Gabrielino Tonga. This is now occupied by our institutions, honors their elders past, present, and descendants who are citizens of Gabriel Lino, Tongva, and Ferdinand Tatavian Band of Missions Indians. We recognize that the tribes is still here and we are committed to lifting up their stories, culture, and community. Just a little bit about Abundant Housing LA. Abundant Housing LA is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to address the upstream causes of the housing crisis and housing shortages and build a movement for structural change so that LA becomes a place of abundant housing. Why is abundant housing for all so important? There's a few main reasons. One of them being more affordable housing is needed. Multi-family apartment buildings are cheaper per unit than single family homes, but even though so many people need a place to live, most of LA is still zoned for housing scarcity through low density suburban sprawl. Also addressing racial economic inequality, white supremacy creates exclusionary single family zoning and then sold it to the public as American dream. More housing density means more diversity and neighborhoods. We seek to achieve more housing for all through advocacy, policy, and education to shift LA culture to see housing as a positive thing. So the purpose of this event is to bring awareness to our members, volunteers that LA faces a major homeless crisis, as you guys can see. We need to speak up for the homeless people. They are our neighbors struggling to make ends meet. That criminalizing them is not the way to go. We need to come together and discuss comprehensive solutions that work so we can solve this crisis together. So we'll begin with introducing, I think there's an echo. If you guys could mute yourself. There we go. There you go. All right, sorry about that. We will begin with the panel discussion where I'll ask questions to our panelists first. There will be an opportunity for Q&A towards the end of discussion. If you guys want to ask questions, please hold those questions towards the end, and we're gonna use the chat. So, and then we'll read those questions. That way, we don't overspeak over everyone. So if you guys have any questions, please use the chat. We're not gonna use the speaker. We're gonna leave the speaker for our panelists only, and just use the chat to add your question there towards the end of the panel discussion. So let's begin by introducing you to our three fantastic panelists who are experts in the field of of homeless population. Our first panelist is Mahdi Manji. Mahdi joined Inner City Law Center as a public policy advocate in May 2020. His work focuses on developing and advocating for policies to end and prevent homelessness in LA County. Prior to joining ICLC, Mahdi worked with ACLU of Southern California, where he planned and managed ACLU's SoCal School and Community First campaign efforts. He has worked on electoral and issues organizing campaigns in Los Angeles, Orange County, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, including organizing efforts to defend the Affordable Care Act in pivotal Orange County Congressional District. Mahdi is a graduate of UCLA and speaks Farsi and Urdu. Is that correct? Welcome, Mahdi. We also have Ned Resnikoff, Policy Manager for the Benioff Homelessness and Housing Initiative at UC San Francisco. Ned is a policy manager for the Benioff Homeless and Housing Initiative at UC San Francisco. He was previously a policy analysis for the California legislator. Prior to that, he was an editor and journalist with bylines in the New York City Times, the Atlantic Monthly, and SNBC.com, and elsewhere. He holds a Master's of Public Policy from Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley. And our final panelist is Linda Locks, who is Community Engagement and Special Events for Venice Community Housing. Linda Locks is a community activist who has lived and worked in Venice area since 1970, where she raised her family. For 10 years, Linda coordinates community engagement and special events for Venice Community Housing, a nonprofit, which I have here the link at WCHCORP.org, a nonprofit community organization providing low income and permanent supporting housing, youth programs, resident service, and homelessness services, and community-based solutions to meet those in needs for the past 30 years. Linda previously served as president of the Venice Neighborhood Council, the City Board of Neighborhood Empowerment, and over 10 years, over the years has served at various cities, county, states, commissions, and nonprofit boards. When not working on issues, she loves to read, dance, follow politics, and visit her children's, her grandchildren's, and hang out with friends. So welcome to our three panelists. We're going to kick off our discussion by opening some opening statements for our panelists. Mari, want to kick us off first by opening statements for you?
Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here, and thank you for spending your, I believe, Thursday evening with us to discuss this important issue. I think if there's one takeaway that I hope you all leave with tonight, and I think this is an educated audience, you already know this. Housing and homelessness are the same issue. And I think there is an effort from folks to separate these issues, to make it seem like there are a number of people who are homeless for a number of reasons, and then there are the rest of us who may or may not be struggling with housing costs, and many of us are struggling with housing costs. I think the one takeaway that I would like folks to leave tonight with is a realization that housing and homelessness are the same issue, and the existence of homeless folks on our streets is largely the effect of the symptom of how out of whack our housing system is, how bad things have gotten, and symptomatic of sort of the lack of social service safety net in the United States. So that's really the key takeaway from tonight, hopefully, at least from my end. And thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Mari. Any opening remarks, Ned?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having us. Really excited for this conversation. I'm coming to you from Northern California, hence the sweater. It's a little bit chillier up here, but really happy to be speaking to you, and really especially happy to be speaking to both an Abundant Housing LA audience, because I've done an event with Abundant Housing before, but also a Los Angeles audience, because I think sometimes the conversation about housing and homelessness in the Bay Area can be a little bit Bay Area centric, but we really have a California-wide, and to a great extent, a national housing and homelessness crisis. And as Mahdi indicated, it is the same crisis. And we need both national and statewide solutions. We're pretty focused at BHHI on the statewide solutions. And for that, we really need to emphasize Los Angeles, I think, more than we sometimes do in Bay Area conversations about homelessness. The greatest concentration of homeless people in California is in Los Angeles. It's a huge issue where you are, as I'm sure you all know. And having a sort of balkanized, I think, regionalized conversation about this can cause us to miss a little bit of what really needs to happen, which is these sort of broader, overarching policy interventions that also address some of the specific challenges that different regions face. That what homelessness looks like in Los Angeles is different than what it looks like in the Bay Area, and so some of the solutions are going to be a little bit different. And we can talk a little bit more about that down the road. But that's all just to say that I think these sorts of conversations between Northern and Southern California and between different regions, the Central Valley as well, the North Coast, are extremely important to actually getting our arms around this issue. And so happy to be a part of this particular conversation.
Thank you, Ned. And I'll pass it to Linda. You're still mute, Linda.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Oh,
I could hear
good.
you.
Sorry, my cat. So I can only speak through my phone because my computer isn't working. I hope that's not too upsetting. I don't know how to change that. Anyway, let me just say quickly, Venice Community Housing is very involved in advocacy, and I want to thank Abundant Housing for not working. That's too annoying. It's too annoying.
Linda, I would suggest you mute your computer audio so that there's no audio coming from the computer.
My computer is muted.
Yeah, I think someone else is echoing. So if everyone mutes except for Linda, then we might be able to hear her without the echo.
I think it's me. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. It's just echoing. Oh, no, we cannot hear you.
I think the one opportunity might be if your audio from your computer is muted, such that there's no audio coming from your computer at all. Because that's a possible scenario where if your audio is, what I think is if the audio is coming in from the phone, and then also there's audio coming out of the computer, even if it's that computer is muted, you might want to turn off the audio from the computer. See if that works.
Yeah, you're mute, Linda. Okay, I guess she'll type it in. Okay, yeah, if you could just type it in, that'll be great. Sorry about that, Linda. Okay, so I guess we're gonna have to move forward. So we'll ask the questions, and then you could just type them in, Linda, and I'll be able to read them. I think that'll be probably the best solution for this for now. I guess you could just type in your introduction. Fortunately, we cannot have you mention your introduction, but I guess we'll kick off with the first question. The first question for the three of our panelists is, what have we learned from housing the unhoused as quickly as possible during the pandemic? So you guys can, either Ned, Linda, and Mahdi can just jump in.
Well, I can start with that. I think the number one thing we've learned from Project Home Key, which was is the hotel acquisition project to create permanent housing out of hotel rooms, is that actually we can create new permanent housing for unhoused people very, very quickly if we set our minds to it. I think a lot of people, myself included, were really surprised by how quickly, and we got thousands of units through Project Home Key. And it's really because we treated this like the crisis that it is. It happened to intersect with the COVID-19 crisis. And I think that cleared away a lot of the procedural hurdles that typically exist to creating those sorts of units. And I think there's a lesson in that, because even once the COVID-19 crisis recedes, the homelessness crisis is still going to be here. And so staying on an emergency footing and continuing to try and move as quickly as possible to house people, I think is something we can take away from this experience.
I think Ned really hit the nail on this one. With Project Home Key, we've really seen the state government provide grants to localities to very quickly acquire hotels and to acquire, to my knowledge, some residential properties as well that may have been empty for a number of reasons. Complete sort of a rehabilitation process to make these properties from their current status to permanent supportive housing, and get them operating within a number of months. And I think, the governor has seen that this is a model to move forward and expanded it. I believe $6 billion for this year, fiscal year, and $6 billion for the future year. I think that goes a long way. I don't want to overstate it though. With $6 billion a year, we're still talking about a cost of something around the range of $190,000 per unit for a permanent supportive housing unit, which is extremely affordable compared to sort of the previous development cost for a standard affordable housing development, coming, at least in the LA area, coming around close to 500,000, which Ned might be like, that's a great number. I know in San Francisco, those numbers are a little bit closer to 750 or 800,000 for getting a permanent supportive housing unit online. So looking at this as an opportunity, if we can bring online units at $190,000, that $6 billion can go a long way. But I think to want to highlight one point here, in that this is not a silver bullet. I'm sorry for the gun analogy. I should have thought of something else, but we are sort of facing a crisis that is cumulatively sort of worsened over the last 40 years. And currently we're something around the range of 150, 160,000 folks in California who are experiencing homelessness. And this is an important sort of tool in the toolbox. And I think we all need to pressure the governor and legislature to expand this and expand it many, many folds over.
Thank you, Mahdi, for that. And I guess if Linda, if you want to type in your answer, happy to do so. So Linda, so it looks like my next question is for, there has been a lot of innovation when it comes to housing the homeless. So one of the things I would love to, this is more like a follow-up question from the previous, is what strategies are proven to work and one isn't? We've seen so many great innovations throughout LA County just so we could house the homeless population as soon as possible. So I'm gonna pass it to you guys. What strategies are proven to work and what isn't?
Actually, Jamie, before we get to that, it looks like we have some answers from Linda in the chat via Rebecca.
Oh, Rebecca's typing them. Okay. So it looks like this went from Linda to, thank you. Okay, so this, there is something from Rebecca. It says, this went from Linda to me by mistake. Thank Abundant Housing for your support. It is important that we support each other in our efforts. Venice Community Housing has 315 units in development. Again, a lot of community opposition. The key takeaway and advice is to not be sidelined and distracted by loud and nasty oppositions, to go forward, build relationships, find allies, and go forward, to advocate with like-minded people, for each other works. Also from Linda, there's another part. The cost is excuse to oppose any projects. Of course, we need to bring price down, but I cannot stop us because we must house as many people as possible. Those are some good thoughts, Linda. Thank you for that. So I guess we'll pass on to the next follow-up. What strategies are proven to work and what isn't?
Well, the overarching strategy, which the state of California has adopted, and I think it's just a matter of implementing it as much as possible, is housing first. And that really is what works. And what housing first means is that first and foremost, we're prioritizing getting people who are currently unhoused into permanent housing, not shelter, permanent housing. Um, and along with that, those who need additional supports and services have the option of receiving those supports and services as they're being transitioned to permanent housing and afterward. A lot of people who are currently homeless really just need a home and will be fine once they are slotted into permanent housing, maybe with some rental subsidies. But then there are also people who do have sometimes quite profound physical or mental disabilities, substance use disorder, and those folks do need additional help. So a part of Housing First is providing that additional help. And there's been a lot of empirical research on Housing First. One study that I always return to was actually conducted by BHHI, where I work. A couple of researchers there did a randomized control trial in Santa Clara County for a permanent supportive housing project there. This is a type of Housing First oriented approach. And an RCT, for the non-nerds in the room, I mean, that's basically the closest you can get to replicating laboratory conditions when you're doing social science research. So it's a really high standard of evidence to have an RCT of a policy intervention. And what they found was that this sort of Housing First style intervention worked even for the highest needs population, which is the people they were looking at, people who were regular utilizers of emergency psychiatric services, emergency departments, people who had repeated interactions with the criminal justice system, been jailed repeatedly. When they were followed up with some time after the initial study, 90% of the folks who went through this treatment were still housed. And for this population, that's really quite an amazing number. So long story short, even for the absolute highest need, hardest to serve people, which is a small subset of the overall homeless population, Housing First still works.
I want to second everything Ned said. And I want to add something to this, right? When folks are living on the street, that's not a great place to receive mental health services, not a great place to receive substance abuse services. And I think that being said, it's important to realize not everyone who's lived on the street needs substance abuse services. Not everyone needs mental health services. Many folks, and it just depends on the city, but in many cities, the vast majority of folks just need an affordable place to live. And that I think is key. I want to also talk about some of the strategies that are more upstream, thinking about folks that are not yet homelessness, but at risk of homelessness. I think one of the numbers that scares me the most is, I think, 2019 report from the United Way of Los Angeles talking about 600,000 households in LA County who pay 90% of their income towards rent, right? That is a very scary number that should be terrifying all of us, because if you're a member of that household, and I have been a member of that type of household, what I can say is that's a very precarious place to be, because that's one parking ticket away from becoming homeless. That's one tire puncture away from losing your job and then becoming homeless, right? That is a very little runway when you're in that type of household to ending up on the street. That's a high water bill. It's a high electricity bill. So I think we want to be thinking about strategies that keep people housed. And I want to highlight a couple of them, a couple that Inner City Law Center works on. One is a right to counsel, essentially ensuring that everybody who is facing eviction proceedings has the opportunity to access an attorney. That's extremely essential. Many studies have shown that folks who have access to an attorney are substantially less likely to be evicted. Nearly all landlords are represented by attorneys, and something around the range of 5 to 10% of tenants facing eviction are represented by attorneys. So, during this pandemic, the city of and county of LA have created a process called Stay Housed LA, which ensures that if folks are aware of it, they do have access to an attorney. It's important that this process is extended into the future, past this pandemic, to ensure that everyone has access to an attorney. I think other important policies that go a long way from preventing homelessness are rent control, policies that stabilize rents from increasing rapidly, enforcement of Ellis Act evictions, essentially ensuring that landlords are not sort of evicting tenants without going through the proper procedures. So I think all of these go a long way in ensuring that before folks become homeless, that the laws that exist protect them and allow people to live in the communities that they've lived in and prevent them from becoming homeless in the first place.
Thank you, Mahdi. Yeah, that's very important. Prevention, I've always mentioned this previously in my coalitions before that ones that I've done throughout the years. Prevention is key. Preventing people from becoming homeless. Some of the things that you mentioned, Mahdi, those are really important. Thank you for that. So I'm going to jump into the next question. With historic levels of state
Jamie, we have a chat comment from Linda again.
Oh, there is okay. Thank you for keeping an eye on me, Ned. So there is something from Linda. Permanent housing is the only long-term solution. There is so much anger at homeless people and blame politicians and housing providers for causing homelessness, which is not logical. Our strategy is to push forward the cause. We know housing first works. Most people do not know or understand the facts. We could take all our time trying to explain and educating them and the importance, but not at the expense of slowing down the process. This is an anger because people could not be more moved during the pandemic. People do not care. Abundant Housing does a great job of trying to educate people. Our strategy is to aggressively find properties to develop while engaging surrounding communities. We are lucky in my area because the elected officials are all supportive and don't back down. However, some are at risk because of their strong position. Thank you, Linda. And I will go to the next question. Thank you, Ned, for keeping an eye on me on that. With historic levels of state funding, housing homeless people, what can providers and policymakers do to maximize the impact of the dollars?
Well, I think that the rules governing the spending of those dollars is really important. So making sure that zoning rules, local planning regulations don't get in the way of moving really expeditiously and being flexible, but also making sure that everything is aligned with the sort of housing first approach that we outlined, which is baked into the most recent budget. The Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council is coordinating the distribution of, for example, the $1 billion in grants for local governments, and they're charged with making sure that that money is spent in a way that conforms to local conditions and make sure that you're dealing with the unique situation in LA versus the Bay Area or anywhere else in California, but also that it all is part of an overall statewide housing first strategy. The other thing I'd mention is that this $12 billion is really just an initial down payment on a solution. So it's really important that we figure out long-term financing to really provide a base for a long-term strategy for addressing homelessness.
I think, Ned, whatever last sentence you said, that's exactly what I want to say. I mean, I think we're talking about historic levels of funding because in some ways, yes, this is a historic level of funding. In 2019, Governor Newsom made a big press release about how he had committed $1 billion from the budget and how this was the biggest investment in homelessness ever. And, this year, 2020, we saw that $12 billion investment, which is $6 billion this year and $6 billion next year, which in many ways is extremely massive and unprecedented. But at the other time, I struggle to sort of kind of accept that this is the best that we can do, right? It's historic only because the past was extremely inadequate. And it is unfortunate that I think it's important that we continue advocating to sort of really address the full scope of the need. It's really, a crisis that 160,000 people every night are forced to sleep on the streets, right? That is a problem that we need to address with substantially more than $6 billion a year. And more importantly, it's a problem that we need to address more than with one-time sort of surpluses. Because there's a surplus this year, and it's the budget analysts are projecting the surplus next year. But surpluses are, by their nature, not permanent. We need to make long-term commitments to continually creating funding streams to create affordable housing and to support acquisition strategies like Project Homekeep. But I think the key aspect is here. This needs to be permanent and it needs to be sustainable. It needs to be something that year over year we will build more affordable housing. Year over year we will acquire more affordable housing, and in the long term we will sort of prevent people from becoming homeless. I think the biggest problem we're facing, at least in LA County, is there are more people. We're housing thousands of folks. I believe last year LA County was successful at housing around something along the lines of 32,000 people. And the only problem that we had was that 46,000 new people came into homelessness. So if we don't address that, if we don't ensure that people are not becoming homeless, if ensuring that people are staying housed, we're going to be in a very difficult situation. And so that's the thing I want to address: scale and ensuring protection of people who are currently housed.
Thank you, Mahdi. I do have a response from Linda. Thank you for sharing that, Linda. We must collaborate whenever possible to share what we learn with each other and help. If anyone attends the recent SCAMP conference, there was workshops about sharing knowledge, data, polls, research to create an economic scale. Yes, the SCAMP conference was a very good conference for those that were able to attend. It was an amazing conference where there was a lot of discussions with some of the people that are involved in the homeless population. So let's jump into our next question. What is the biggest roadblock for housing the homeless population? Why are other neighborhoods in LA not approaching the homeless people that the same way as West LA neighborhoods have? Sorry.
Well, it's hard to think of a single big roadblock, but I would say one thing that is a huge issue is just supply shortage, that we need more units overall. We especially need extremely low income units. And there's a lot that can be done on the services and support side. More vouchers if the Build Back Better plan passes, more housing vouchers, housing navigation services, which now some Medi-Cal plans will be able to offer as part of their benefits to housing insecure or homeless Medi-Cal beneficiaries. But the vouchers and the housing navigation are only going to get you so far if the housing isn't there. And so that's why it's important to be doing everything at once right now. Building more units as quickly as possible, raising the incomes of low income people, and just providing as many services and supports as we can.
I think as Ned said, ultimately, the biggest roadblock is the lack of housing. In LA County, we passed a measure called Measure H to create a lot of services, to create a coordinated entry system, to figure out what people's needs are. But if we don't have the affordable housing for people to live in, it creates, we can't service our way out of this problem. I think one of the biggest roadblocks, if we're talking roadblocks, is ensuring that neighborhoods are overcoming affordable housing, overcoming opposition to affordable housing, right? What we've seen throughout the city of LA, right, You know, an affordable housing developer wants to build affordable housing. You'll have 20, 30, 40 people show up opposed to it, right? What we need is 50, 60 people coming out in support of it as well. You know, there are just these pernicious myths that affordable housing is going to increase crime in the area. Affordable housing is going to reduce housing prices in the area. And there's a lot of studies on this, and really none of the studies have found this to be true. It's just not, there's no data suggesting that affordable housing increases crime. There's no data suggesting affordable housing reduces housing prices. And really, all the data has shown exactly the opposite. So I think what we need, you know, in terms of roadblocks is, first of all, funding. And number two is ensuring that the housing overcomes that neighborhood opposition, ensuring folks show up for affordable housing. And that needs to be done everywhere, right? We can't just be building affordable housing in a couple of neighborhoods. We need to be doing this everywhere. And I think in the city of LA, that's important, but it's also important in Torrance, right? It's also important in like Glendale. It's also important in wealthy suburbs. This is very, you know, essential. We don't want to be sort of building every single affordable housing unit only in Skid Row, only in South LA, in East LA. We want to be building throughout the city in every neighborhood.
Thank you, Mahdi. We also have another response from Linda. Political situation is good now, so doing as much as possible now because of its hang. Roadblocks are people who don't want affordable housing in their neighborhoods. The answer is to organize ourselves because there's more of us than them, but we must find them. We have a big hearing. Oh, this is a good one. We have a big hearing on December 1st. Thank you for bringing that up, Linda. And we need everyone to wade in and help every neighborhood. Each of us has to step up. That's true. We do have a hearing coming up for in Venice. I will share with you that shortly, and that's definitely a way, just bringing more supported housing for the homeless population. We need to speak up. We cannot just be sitting down. You know, if not in your backyard folks are doing the same thing, you know, I'm sure we could do the same thing. We just have to rally together and just show up and, you know, speak up. You know, it's better to have them home in a safe place than rather having them on the street. What looks more pleasant, a building or them sleeping on the street? You know, I'll take the building next to my house. You know, that seems more appropriate. It seems more humane, and you know, that's the answer to the solution. And it's just so ridiculous that a lot of people are against housing the homeless population in their backyard. It's just ridiculous. It's very inhumane. And there was an article that was mentioned recently when our communication manager was saying that they wanted to in this article they say that they wanted to house the homeless population in Lancaster. I'm like, why would you want to put them over there? It's hot. It's cold in winter. There's no resources. We need them here so they could have resources that they need. There was also another thing from Linda. Ours is one project, but there are many. And our new one has 140 units for the homeless and low-income people. If it takes all of us to take personal responsibility and act, it's all of us. Thank you for that, Linda. And that's definitely a good opportunity there that I'll be doing a call of action within a few days for you guys to organize. There's also another question. I'll be jumping into the next question. Is LA, so this is going to be more about how we've been treating the homeless population. Is LA approaching the homeless people in a humane and effective way? And what are some examples?
So I think there's one particular area that, you know, we've been very concerned about is sort of a measure some of you guys may have heard about, an ordinance called 4118, which, you know, what we had during the pandemic was, due to these emergency conditions, the city council passed an ordinance to sort of stop the clearing of encampments. And over the course of the pandemic, we've seen the enlargement of encampments. And so the response now has been, well, let's clear away all these encampments. let's sweep all these areas up, and then, I guess people will have to move around. And I think the biggest problem with this approach is it doesn't do anything to solve the underlying problem, which is the lack of affordable housing, the lack of permanent supportive housing, and the fact that, if people don't have somewhere else to live, they're going to be sleeping in their cars. And if they don't have a car to sleep in, they're going to be sleeping on the sidewalk. So I think this approach is very much, it is a very inhumane approach. It's an approach that is not addressing the problem and not addressing sort of the solution. It's really just using the police to solve a problem that people are unhappy with, right? If I'm living in a house and I'm paying $3,000 a month for this, I don't want this person sleeping in front of my house. Great, sure, you don't want that person sleeping in front of your house. I'm pretty sure that person does not want to be sleeping in front of your house either. So let's build some affordable housing. Let's build some permanent supportive housing. Let's solve this problem. But it doesn't help anyone. When you're fining people, you're ticketing people, all it causes is a lot of pain, a lot of misery, a lot of inconvenience, and a lot of cost to our system. It put people in jail for a day, and then guess what? When they come out, they're going to be in the same situation. So I think it's really a pernicious approach. It's like, hey, I don't want to see this problem, so I'm going to pass a law. But the law doesn't solve the problem, right? It's just kicking the can down the road.
I'd like to yes and all of that, but also just add it's actually even worse than that, because not only do encampment sweeps not solve the problem, but they actually exacerbate it. If you're trying to stabilize someone in housing, subjecting them to sweeps, which can be extremely disruptive, but also cause them to potentially lose their possessions if they're thrown out, increase the likelihood of interactions with the criminal justice system. These are all things that actually make it harder to house people. There's an anecdote in a recent New York Times article about a guy who was living in a tent, and over the summer, the city was really aggressively conducting sweeps. And this is someone who said that every day he basically has to make a choice between, is he going to go to the methadone clinic, in which case he has to leave his tent unattended, in which case it might get thrown out in a sweep and he'll lose all his possessions, or try to white knuckle it through withdrawal without methadone and risk a relapse. And that's really not a choice that we should be subjecting people to if we want to actually get them housed. Similarly, if someone is swept up in an encampment sweep and for whatever reason they end up in jail for a couple nights or potentially get ticketed, well, then they have a record. And it's hard enough to find employment when you're homeless, but try doing it when you're homeless and you have a criminal record. And if you can't get employed, similarly, if it's harder to fill out a rental application when you have that sort of record as well. You're just raising the barriers to ultimately getting people housed.
Thank you for that. We also have something from Linda. I'm going to read it right now. The LA City Council is cleaning encampment, and most city council members just want them to send to other neighborhoods. That's true. They do musical chairs. The council is also just began requirement for outreach teams, but there's not enough housing, shelters, or safe parking anywhere. The only moral approach is not to move people until either permanent or temporary housing is found. Um, this has worked in Venice, but the councilman who is making it happen has a recall campaign against him, and in my organization sent staff to absorb the cleanups to make sure the police and sanitations do it legally. Participation in the process as watchers is good. Thank you for that, Linda. So let's continue with Q&A. So that's all the questions I have for you guys. Of course, there was a few more questions I was going to ask, but we don't have enough time, and I do want to give our members some time to ask questions. So we're going to open the floor to our members, our attendees for Q&A. Unfortunately, we're not going to be doing, you cannot do the speaker. So please pop your questions into the chat, and then I'll read them out loud. And we have one from Rebecca. I agree, witnessing matters. I've done that as well. I'm concerned about what happens even after people are moved into programs like Project Room Key, after the massive park and street eviction going on in LA right now. PRK, Project Room Key, does not seem to carry out consistency housing first policy, because people are often kicked out of their hotel rooms for breaking the list of rules. Are you aware of any policies talked about to remediate this? Ooh, good question. Mhm.
Well, I think the room key question is a good one. I want to make sure that we keep in mind the distinction between Project Home Key and Project Room Key. Room Key is really more of a sort of emergency shelter for COVID-19 shelter in place, and Home Key is the permanent housing project. But they're both pandemic era hotel acquisition projects. So the issue with Room Key and the sort of list of rules, I don't know about the specific concerns there, but that's a pretty common experience with shelters in general. I think that there are particular rules that might make individuals either likely to get kicked out of shelters or just reluctant to go into them, and some of them are just pretty straightforward things, such as someone who is offered shelter might say, well, this is a gender segregated shelter and I don't want to be split up from my partner or split up from my kids, or there are no pets allowed in this shelter and I have a dog that is really important to me. And figuring out how to accommodate those folks is really important. I think ultimately the solution, again, not to sound like a broken record, is housing, but shelter will continue to play an important role moving forward in California's response. And so figuring out ways to provide shelter that actually meets the needs of the individuals who would be sheltered is really critical. Implementation matters.
Linda does have a response here. And you move to turn Room Key to Home Key. Home Key is a long-term solution because it provides permanent housing. There is an active movement to purchase hotels, motels for homes.
Yeah, I think I just want to add, Project Room Key, it was a good program for the moment, but I mean, I think there were a lot of concerns around Project Room Key and other shelter site situations, temporary housing type situations, because they do sometimes create barriers and rules that just put people in difficult situations, right? We want people to get jobs. We want people to live their lives. We want people to, I guess, experience the same freedoms that we do. I mean, sometimes you might want to go to Taco Bell at 2 a.m. I'm not saying you should, but you might want to do that, right? And you shouldn't not be able to do that just because you're poor. And I think that's essentially what we're talking about here, right? If folks are too poor to afford housing and they have to live in a shelter, we shouldn't be subjecting them to sort of unreasonable conditions that we ourselves would not be willing to subjugate ourselves to, right? At the end of the day, if you wouldn't be willing to do it, why would you want other people to be put in that same situation, right? So I think that's the way we have to judge this.
Thank you, Mahdi. We have another question from our audience. This is more about zoning, so hopefully you guys are able to answer this question. Can you talk about how zoning intersects with affordable housing?
Short, simple answer. Restrictive zoning makes housing more expensive, makes it so that there's less housing, makes it so that more people are homeless. To expand on that just a little bit, I'll note that when restrictive when single family zoning was introduced in California in my current home city of Berkeley, the reasoning behind it was quite explicitly racial segregation to keep Black people out of white residential neighborhoods. And as you can see from the statistics in California now, that has been incredibly successful, not just at segregating California, but at also introducing a really profound racial disparity in rates of homelessness in California. I think the current numbers are something like 6 or 7% of California is Black, and about 40% of the homeless population is Black, and that's a legacy of efforts to systematically deny housing, both in certain neighborhoods, but also to a great extent overall to Black people. And so dealing with that, addressing that is going to involve a real rethinking of how planning is done in the state. I'm happy to say that in Berkeley, that process has begun with they're starting to roll back single family zonings citywide.
I want to second everything Ned said and just add sort of that when we don't zone enough sort of parcels for multifamily zoning, we're forcing affordable housing developers to compete with market rate developers, right? When it costs $500,000 to build a unit, the subsidy required to make it affordable is going to be much higher than if that cost was $450, right? And again, it was a cost of $400. Ultimately, a big percentage of this cost is coming from the land, and we're forcing sort of affordable housing developers to compete with for-profit developers by not zoning enough land for multifamily development.
Great, thank you, Mahdi. I do have a response from Linda. Well, let me see if that's correct. Linda said, let me see, there's two Lindas here, just want to make sure. Linda mentioned that zoning and redlining has created a segregated communities in California. Freeway expansion also displaces POC all over SoCal. Downzoning has hurt communities. Like Venice, as poor families couldn't build apartments for their kids, now SB 9 and 10, people will be able to build more units. Yes, that's correct. For context, SB 9 and 10 was recently passed. That's gonna allow more housing for SB 9, and then 10 just makes it easier to streamline the process to build units up to 10 units. So thank you for mentioning that, Linda. So let's go to the next questions. So I have another one here from Linda. Linda Numir. Cities are not putting a stop to landlord groups who hike rent. So many people who people on Social Security are moving closer to homelessness. The local politicians get higher by getting contributions from these landlord groups. So the let me see. So the two groups use the argument that they want to support the market or market rates, but these people cannot create the market. How do we reach across out to these powerful groups to make, ooh, just got another one. I lost my powerful groups to make them see that are part of the problem. What do you think about asking cities to publish their vacancy list? At this point, I don't think the key housing vacancies, so they don't know, but they should know.
Yeah, this is something that comes up a lot on the subject of vacancies. You know, you often hear that the housing scarcity is something that's being artificially generated by holding a large number of units vacant, and that's driving supply scarcity. If we reduce the vacancies, then prices would naturally come down. Unfortunately, that's just not really the case. If you look at data on where what cities have the which major metro areas, I should say, have the highest numbers of vacancies and which have the lowest number of vacancies nationwide, the vacancy rate is actually inversely correlated with rates of homelessness. So what that means is that the cities with the fewest actual vacancies are the ones that have the greatest homelessness. And that makes sense if you assume that low vacancy rates are actually an indicator of a housing supply issue of scarcity. So, you know, I would like to believe that there's some large supply of apartments that are completely empty, and we just need to free those up and get people into them. But unfortunately, there's just no way out of the fact that the apartments that we need don't exist, and so we need to build more of them.
Yeah, I think to that point, there's a very substantial shortage of housing at all income levels, right? And this is most acute at lower income levels, right? And so we need to really ensure that we are really increasing the supply of affordable housing, including and permanent supportive housing. I think one way to really look at this is policies like inclusionary zoning, policies like the density bonus. In LA, we have a program called the Transit Oriented Communities, the TOC program. Programs that allow for the construction of market rate housing with a percentage of affordable housing. I think we need to expand those policies to a lot more areas and really ramp up production.
All right, well, we're almost past our time, so we want to be respectful to everyone's time. But first of all, I want to leave you guys with a call of action from Linda. I'm gonna share with you guys our call of action for this night for the housing project that Linda mentioned. Please attend this hearing and support this project. Let me pop in the talking points. Okay, so here is the link for the hearing. And then I'm also going to share with the talking points. So copy and paste. All right. And I'm also going to do an email to you guys. So please be on the lookout. Please support this project. It's really important that this project moves forward. There's been a lot of pushback from the community, but also a lot of people are supporting this project. So please attend the hearing and support this project. And I'm going to thank everyone for joining in this evening. I know it's kind of late, but you know, this is important. Conversations like this need to happen. And I'm glad you guys were able to be part of it. We didn't get across all the questions, but I'm glad that you guys were able to participate. For our panelists, thank you so much for joining in and have a good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Before we go, Jamie,
yes,
the link you sent to the chat, both of them don't work for
okay.
me.
All right. So what I'll do, I'll send an email to everyone that signed up for this panel discussion. You guys will receive the call of action. I think that'll be easier. Thank you for that, Andrew.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Have a great night, folks.